Post-Haste, or Letters from the Past, would be a series of travel, history and human interest documentaries examining the content of historic letters and tracing their journeys across the globe. While being very different from it, the series should attract the same large audiences who watched Michael Portillo's Great Railway Journeys. It should also have popular appeal in the United States, where an episode could show, for example, how mail was somehow exchanged between the North and the South during the American Civil War. The presenter would examine the original letters and follow as closely as possible the journeys they took to their original destinations. A program would include interviews with historians who are expert on the writers of the letters content, and their journeys. The series has nothing to do with stamp collecting, other than that we have many collectors to thank for the thousands of fascinating letters they have kept for posterity. The demonstration video which follows was made with a budget of £300. On December the 20th, 1866, a letter was posted in Cannes to an address in England. This is the letter. 2 days later, it was delivered to Mrs. Hamilton, Glenarbuck Lodge, The Park, Cheltenham. How did it get there so quickly? And how long would it take a letter posted today in Cannes to reach Cheltenham? We'll find out.
Cannes, December the 20th, 1866. Dearest Mamma, how I shall miss you at Christmas time. Last night we were invited to dinner at Lord Brougham's magnificent chateau, Eleonora Louise. Everyone was speaking French, but I managed to understand most of what was said. Today it's more French lessons with Mademoiselle Colombier. Irregular verbs, I fear. She has a habit of speaking to me as if
We know that the letter was posted in Cannes on December the 20th because it received its first postmark on that day.
Cannes, 20 décembre 1866.
And we can trace the letter's journey, since it was postmarked 5 more times on its way to Cheltenham. From the post box, the letter would have been taken by hand or horse-drawn wagon to the railway station. Cannes station is still where it was 150 years ago. From there, the letter travelled to Marseille, along the same route the railway takes now, although the journey then would not have been lined with an almost unending strip of villas. Today's TGVs travel regularly at 200 miles an hour. In 1866, the top speed of a train was about a third of that. For me, it's not the speed of the trains now that's remarkable, it's the speed that these fragile-looking machines could achieve then. Our letter's journey from Cannes to Marseille would have taken about 3 hours to trundle along what is now called the Côte d'Azur, the Blue Coast. In the 1860s, aristocratic British residents referred to this coastline as the French Riviera. The letter arrived in Marseille on the day it was posted.
Marseille, 20 décembre 1866.
19th century English speakers would have spelt and pronounced the town's name with an S on the end, Marseilles. If the S ever was there, the French dropped it a long time ago. Marseillaise describes someone or something from Marseille. You would not have heard the Marseillaise in Marseille in 1866. France had become a monarchy again. You can see the emperor's head on the stamp, and revolutionary songs were banned. The Marseillaise was written in Strasbourg by a man from the Jura and famously sung by a man from Montpellier. So what has it to do with Marseille? Well, a group of revolutionary soldiers from that town marched the 500 miles to Paris and entered the town singing that song. 60 years later, the railway could have made that journey much swifter. In Marseille, the letter was transferred to a Paris train, which left the following day.
Marseille, 21 décembre 1866.
The very next day it was delivered to Mrs. Hamilton's house in Cheltenham. A contemporary timetable shows the quickest journey from Marseille to Paris at 6 hours 40 minutes. The line via Lyon had been open for 10 years, and France's rail network was continuing to expand. Tenez la gauche. Britain had a key role in the building of France's early railways. Therefore, many French trains drove on the left, and in fact, still do. There is no date stamp to record its arrival in Paris, but our letter must have come into the Gare de Lyon. This Gare de Lyon was built in 1900 to coincide with the Great Exhibition of that year. In 1866, the Gare de Lyon was an altogether more modest affair. From it, our letter would have gone by horse and wagon to the Gare du Nord. Paris in the 1850s was not unlike the London of Charles Dickens. Closely packed, squalid streets formed much of the city's centre. Napoleon III, nephew of Bonaparte, had already been president of France before he became emperor. His dictatorial powers enabled him and his prefect of the Seine, Baron Haussmann, to create a new Paris. Louis Napoleon commanded the Baron aérer, unifier et embellir, literally ventilate, unify and beautify. Haussmann set about clearing the slums, creating open spaces and giving the city its unified style. These broad avenues were under construction as our letter crossed Paris on its way to the northern terminus for Calais. The Eiffel Tower would not appear for another 30 years.
Paris à Calais, 21 décembre 1866.
The next postmark is not very clear, but we know that it reads Paris à Calais, indicating that it was added during the letter's journey on a moving train. To speed deliveries, French railways used a travelling post office in which the mail was sorted on the move. The time it took the steamer to cross from Calais to Dover is almost exactly the same as it takes an aircraft today to fly from Nice to London. Britain's most important postal hub is in Holborn, London. Within this complex is the National Postal Museum, whose archivist, Barry Atto, found for me a very useful bit of evidence about our letter's journey. An immaculately kept logbook from Dover Harbour in the 1860s. You can picture a Dickensian clerk sitting at a tall desk, carefully inscribing with his dip pen the times at which the mail arrived in Calais, how long it took to cross the Channel, and the departure and arrival times of the trains taking it to London.
London. Paid. 22nd December, 1866.
Once it arrived in London, probably Cannon Street, it would have travelled to St Martin's Le Grand, which was the main sorting office for London. Once sorted, it would have travelled once again by a horse-drawn vehicle, probably to Paddington, probably again direct to Bristol, to once again be resorted.
It's amazing that it did it in the time.
Absolutely.
All this stuff.
Absolutely, absolutely.
And from Bristol to Cheltenham?
Either by train, more likely by train, and then it would have been subdivided locally in Cheltenham, and then delivered probably on foot.
Yeah.
Cheltenham, December 22nd, 1866.
Well, not meanwhile, actually. It was a few weeks earlier. 2 letters were addressed to Simon Griffin, the secretary of the Cheltenham Philatelic Society. I presented one of them across the counter at the post office in Cannes, asking for priority posting. The other went into the regular boîte à lettres. How would the transport of the 20 teens fare in a race against the 1860s? An advantage for the Victorians is that in those days the post might be delivered 5 times a day. It was possible for a man, it would have been a man then, to write a letter to his wife saying that he would be late home from the office that evening. This is the Park, Cheltenham, where this letter was delivered 150 years ago, perhaps to a house like the one behind me. We couldn't actually identify Glenarbuck Lodge, but there are many houses of that period which survive, some of which have been converted into flats, and some have become part of Gloucester University. While in Cheltenham, I called on Simon Griffin, Secretary of the Cheltenham Philatelic Society, who had kindly let me use his address for this experiment. So, Simon, I posted them 2 different ways. One went into a letterbox outside the post office, and I took another one in and asked for it to be sent as quickly as possible. I posted them on the 8th, it says here. When did they arrive?
They came by post at 9:20. I've timed that for you. On the 10th, at 9:30 a.m. These days there's only one morning post, of course, as opposed to...
I think there were 5.
5 back in the, was it 1860s?
1866, yes. Something in me wanted the Victorian letter to get there in the shorter time. As things turned out, it was a dead heat, but pitting a jet airliner against a cross-channel steamer and several horses and carts, I think it's fair to say that the Victorians won on points. In a series, however, this race of the past versus the present would be featured only when it was relevant. It could be a minor point in the fund of possibilities presented by Letters from the Past or Post-Haste. Thank you.